Hello everyone, welcome to Learn ReactJS for Frontend Development by CodeChef. In today's lesson, we'll be discussing ReactContext, an important feature which helps you manage shared data in React in a more efficient way. As your application grows, a common problem is prop drilling when data has to pass through multiple layers of components when most of the components won't even use it. This makes our code harder to read, maintain and scale. ReactContext solves this by allowing components to have direct access to shared data without passing props through every layer. In this lesson, we'll be looking at what prop drilling is and how ReactContext solves it with the help of a practical example. So let's begin. In this lesson, we'll understand ReactContext and how it helps us manage shared data in React applications. We'll focus on avoiding a common issue called prop drilling and see how context makes our code cleaner and easier to maintain. When React applications grow, data often needs to move across many components. Prop drilling happens when we pass the same data again and again through components that don't actually use it. Here, data flows from app to layout and then to course page, and finally to module lessons. Even though only the last component needs the data, every component in between is forced to pass it forward. Now let's see why this is a problem. This leads to messy code, unused props, and makes changes harder. If the component structure changes, we need to fix props everywhere, which doesn't scale well. ReactContext solves this by allowing us to store shared data in one place and make it available to any component that needs it without passing props manually. Think of context as a shared storage. Any component inside the provider can directly access the data, no matter how deeply nested it is. Now the first step here is that we create a context using react.createContext. This creates a container that will hold our shared data like user information or theme settings. Next, we wrap our component tree with the context provider and pass the shared data using the value prop. This makes the data available to all child components. Finally, in the component that needs the data, we use the useContext hook. This allows the component to directly read the data from context without props. Now let's look at a real use case. ReactContext is commonly used for features like theme switching, user authentication, language preferences, and other app-wide settings. So why does this matter here? When solving problems or building UI logic, context helps you keep components focused, reusable, and easy to manage. Now, we have learned prop drilling happens when data is passed through multiple components, even though only one component actually needs it. In our example here, the data is user, the component that needs it is module lessons, and the components in between are layout and course page. The goal is simple: give module lessons access to user without forcing every component in between to pass it down. This is exactly what ReactContext solves. Now let's start with userContext.js because context always starts here. In this file, we use react.createContext null. Conceptually, this creates a shared container for the data. At this point, it does not store any data. It just defines a channel through which data can flow. We export this context so that one component can provide data into it and another component can consume data from it. This file exists purely to define the context. Now let's move on to app.jsx. This is a top level component which makes it correct place to provide context. Inside app, we create a user object. This is the data we want to share across the app. Now instead of passing user as a prop, we wrap the component tree with this particular line over here. This is the most important step. By doing this, the user data is placed into the context, every component inside the provider can access it, and prop drilling is completely removed. Notice something crucial. We do not pass user to layout as a prop anymore. Now let's look at layout.jsx. This component is part of the component tree, but it does not need the user data. With props, layout would be forced to accept and forward user. With context, it doesn't even know user exists. This is intentional. Layout stays focused on layout responsibilities only, not data handling. Next is coursepage.jsx. Just like layout, this component also does not care about the user. And again, no props, no forwarding, and no dependency on the user data. This shows the real benefit of context in larger apps. Components only deal with the data they actually need. Now in modulelessons.jsx, this is the component that actually needs the user data. Here, we use useContext UserContext. This line directly pulls the user object from context. No props, no parent involvement, and no prop drilling. Module lessons gets exactly what it needs, exactly where it needs it. Now to summarize the full flow, UserContext.js defines the shared channel, app.jsx provides the data once, layout and course page stay clean and unaware, while module lessons consumes the data directly. Up to this point, we've used React Context to share static data, specifically the user object, without prop drilling. In that example, context was carrying values like the user's name and progress. Now for this task, the idea stays exactly the same, but the type of data we share expands. Instead of sharing only data, we'll use context to share state and behavior together. Earlier, our context value looked like this, a simple object with user information. Now, our context value will look like this, the current theme and a function that updates the theme. This is an important concept that context is not limited to data, it can also share functions that update the data. In the previous code, app.jsx created the data, userContext.provider made it available, and a deeply nested component consumed it using useContext. That exact pattern will be reused here. The only difference is we'll create two contexts instead of one for theme and one for user. When the theme toggle button is clicked, it doesn't change local state in the button. Instead, it calls a function from context. That function updates the state in app.jsx and React automatically re-renders all components using that state. So a click in the header affects the entire application cleanly and predictably. Even with this added functionality, context is still created with createContext, data is still provided at the top using provider, components still consume data using useContext, and intermediate components will stay clean. As you start the task, keep this checklist in mind. Create context, provide state and functions, consume only what a component needs, and avoid passing props unnecessarily. If you follow this structure, implementing theme switching and user greeting becomes a straightforward extension of what you have already learned. So that wraps up our lesson about React Context. To really understand this concept, make sure to head over to the CodeChef platform and try out the practice problems yourself. That's where the real learning happens. So that was it for this lesson, and I will see you in the next one. Thank you.